Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. This is Jennifer Phillips Russo with the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program, and you are listening to Between the Vines. Our podcast is brought to you in collaboration by Penn State University and Cornell University, and we are in the Lake Erie region. So Western New York, Western Pennsylvania. If you are joining us from around the world, which our numbers say you are, welcome. Please feel free to drop any comments and below, if you're watching this on YouTube, to give us suggestions of what you might want to hear about in the future. And today, my guest host is Bryan Head. Bryan Head is the plant pathologist with Penn State University, working in our Lake Erie research station. Thank you, Bryan, for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I know this is a little bit of an odd format. We always talk, and now we're just recording our talks. So I appreciate you joining me. Once again, you have been on these before in the past. So yeah. I want to talk a little bit about a bunch of things, I guess. First and foremost, we've had some cold temperatures. So the date here in Western New York is April 28th. And yesterday on the 27th, there was a bit of a cold snap. There was some frost on the ground. Some people reported some in the trellis. And we should note that there has been bud progression in Concords and some of the other early ripening varieties. But as for our Concords, which is the majority of the vines in our region, we called official bud break on April 20th. So we are 8 days past bud break, and we have had some nice weather in there. So they have progressed a little bit. You can find them anywhere from just initial bud swell all the way up to like 3 or 4 exposed, not 3 or 4, like 3 exposed leaves on the bud, and a 1/2 inch to 1 inch growth. So what are you seeing down there? Same?
Yeah, I mean, we declared 50% bud break on the 21st, the day after you. Mm-hmm. But they have virtually, not moved much since then. A week later, they're a little bit farther along, but there's still quite a few buds that are just at the brown wool stage here. Most buds have broken, of course. We might be 80% broken buds at this point, but really no shoot growth whatsoever. Just still seeing just the edges of those first leaves. And so we're probably, still hardy, I'm guessing, down to 27, 28 degrees. And we haven't seen any temperatures like that, at least not at the weather stations along the lake here. Now there may be some, little microclimates like we talked about earlier, where temperatures got well below, what our weather stations have recorded. And you might see some damage there, but at least I think our weather stations along the lake here indicate that, for the most part, there's no widespread damage along the lake.
That's fantastic. I'm actually, for those who are watching this on our V blog, because this is brought to you both on YouTube and on your favorite streaming podcast app. But for those of you who are looking at the screen, and we can also describe it as well, there's been research done in the past where we have this critical temperatures of where you're going to experience some of that damage. And it goes from dormant all the way up to about 1.5 inches, and the temperatures that we actually really have to worry about. So looking at this, we should be okay, like you said, between 28 to 29 degrees, but it's just a visual for those of you out there who are watching it so that you can see. And that's basically, you can see pink, you can see the formation of leaves, but hopefully the fluorescence that should be protected enough in there, unless they are more towards that 3 or 4 leaf exposed with the pink edges on them. And if you got down below 28 degrees, you might see some damage. And if you think you have, I would appreciate you dropping me an email so that we can come out and sort of watch the phenology and progression of that, and also report it in case there are any crop insurance issues that you may need to deal with. Looking at those temps, now keep in mind, there are microclimates. We've discussed this. These newest stations are they're located in one point in a vineyard, but they give you a general idea of where the weather or the temps have fallen to. So like in Versailles, we had it at 28.9. I'd really appreciate you going out and checking your vineyards just and reporting back anything that you might be nervous about. We had 29.5 at the Silver Creek on Route 5 station. This is all for the 27th, by the way, yesterday. These are those temps for yesterday. And we had a 29.6 in Ripley, 29.9 in Lake City. So if you are in those areas or slightly nervous and worried, go out and assess some buds and please report back to us so we can have a sort of a running total of that. That's all I'm really going to say about that. What I really wanted Bryan to join us with is because we have hit bud break and the buds are progressing. We have some 1/2 inch to almost 1 inch buds out there. So what should we be thinking about for disease management at this point in time?
Well, the first thing, of course, we deal with every year, I think, as far as fungal diseases goes, is Phomopsis. Phomopsis viticola causes a shoot blight, leaf spots, that sort of thing. But more importantly, I think it can cause lesions on cluster stems or inflorescences, I should say, at this point in time. And those are the things that we really want to be most mindful of, protecting against. Generally, we say that spray to protect those early inflorescences, in other words, as soon as they're exposed, which is about at 3 inches of growth, of shoot growth, and beyond, of course. But protecting against those is probably the most important, might be actually the most important spray for Phomopsis for the entire season, because lesions on those inflorescence stems can months later actually work their way into berries during the ripening period after veraison, and move into those berries, rot the berries, and they simply fall off. So heavy infection on inflorescences early in the season, in late April, early May, can actually have a dramatic effect later during early September, when we start to see fruit just turning brown and falling off. Pennies on the ground.
Yeah, that's not good. May I ask a couple questions? And I'm going to sort of assume the role of a new grower when I ask these questions. Is so you said we could lose fruit when that happens. What can we do? And I hate playing this role because part of me just wants to blurt out what I think we should do. But what can we do to avoid having that inoculum in the trellis? Let's say you've taken over a vineyard and you're really excited about where it's going to take you, but you're not all that familiar with what you should be doing management style. So what can you do before we get to this growing point when you have to start applying sprays to help protect yourself against certain diseases?
Well, for Phomopsis generally overwinters in wood. The older the wood, probably the more inoculum you're going to have overwintering on it. Dead wood is particularly a potent source of inoculum for Phomopsis. So during the dormant period, when you're doing your hand pruning, removing all the dead wood, as much of the diseased wood, older wood that you can find, can go a long way to reducing that inoculum load. Easier said than done, in juice grape vineyards, because we're all on high wire no tie systems that typically maintain a lot of older wood, cordons. Some cordons, maybe in some cases might be decades old, and they built up a lot of dead wood, a lot of old wood, and that's heavy with inoculum for Phomopsis. For wine grape vineyards, it's a little different, especially if you're going to a cane pruning system, where you're actually removing all the wood that's more than a year old. It's below the trellis wire. If you're on a VSP with a cane pruning system, single wire system, and in that case, you can go a long way to removing the threat of Phomopsis. But generally speaking, it's the older wood and the dead wood that's going to harbor Phomopsis inoculum. Vineyards that are machine pruned are going to maintain higher levels of Phomopsis inoculum than vineyards that are hand pruned and carefully hand pruned.
No, thank you for that. So basically having that sanitation, they call them sanitation techniques, or just your management practices of pruning can go a long way for taking care of that. So let's say now we're where we are, and even if you're out an inch to an inch and a half, what is that critical temperature? Everything starts waking up as the weather gets a bit warmer. What is that critical temperature when Phomopsis starts? Is it sporulating?
Well, I mean, it can infect at very low temperatures, generally lower than a lot of the other pathogens, I think. And we've got models that were created by experiments in the laboratory many years ago that we rely on to tell us when an infection period has occurred. And with Phomopsis, generally we see the low temperature threshold of about 46 degrees Fahrenheit. When it gets below that, we basically say, well, there's probably not really any infection that took place below 46 degrees. That may or may not be entirely true. Biology is a little bit more complicated than that, I think.
Right.
But for practical purposes, that cutoff has been about 46 degrees. Once it's below 46 degrees, we don't really concern ourselves that much with Phomopsis infection. Above that, we consider, wetness periods above 46 degrees as potential infection periods for Phomopsis. But it depends on the length of that wetting period. The model is created in such a way that it uses two factors taken into consideration: the length of the wetness period, or the duration of the wetness period, and the average temperature during that wetness period. And for Phomopsis, at that critical low point at 46 degrees, I think they say it requires about 24 hours of continuous wetness at an average temperature of 46 degrees, and boom, you've got a Phomopsis infection period. As you move up in temperature, I'm looking at my little graph above me here with the models on them. We go up to 60 degrees, and we only need about 8 or 9 hours of continuous wetness for a Phomopsis infection period to occur. So as it gets warmer and warmer, that requirement for wetness duration gets lower and lower. Fewer hours are required for infection to have occurred.
Oh, nature is amazing. So my question is, right now, and the reason of having this podcast and the timing of this podcast is we should pretty much be okay right now because the buds are closed, or so much closed, and you don't have a lot of that shoot tissue exposed. That's when we start worrying, is when that shoot tissue is exposed. That's correct?
Yeah, but it's a matter of degrees, I think. Again, we're talking about a mathematical model created, with certain just two measurements. And it, for the most part, it's fairly accurate. I think it gives us a good idea of whether or not an infection period has occurred. But even at 1 inch, 1.5 inches of shoot growth, it is possible for, given the right weather conditions, for Phomopsis to maybe affect that first internode section of the shoot as it grows out. It might be exposed enough to the point where you might get a little bit of infection on it, even at 1 or 1.5 inches of shoot growth. We kind of advise at 3 to 5 inches, put that first spray on, simply because I think there is where the inflorescences become an issue. They're more exposed at that point in time. And it's most important, I think, to protect those early in the season. But if you wait until 3 inches and we get a rain period at 1.5 inches, 2 inches, you're going to get some Phomopsis on your first or second internode sections of the shoots. There's just, that's just what's going to happen. We've seen that happen before. We had an incident, and we talked about this yesterday, where I think it was 2017. We had the first week in May. Very cold, early spring. April was very cold. It didn't warm up until about the middle of May, but we had an inch and a half, 2 inches of shoot growth. At the time that two rather extended wetting periods occurred in the first week in May, and it virtually left every shoot of every Concord vine in every vineyard along the lakeshore with phomopsis lesions on the first and second internode sections. Wow. Didn't really do much to touch the inflorescences because they weren't fully exposed yet. So we didn't see, at least I didn't hear too many reports really where there was a lot of fruit drop later in the season from inflorescence infections. But we certainly saw plenty of phomopsis on the first and second internodes of those shoots. So it does occur. It's kind of a crapshoot trying to hit that sweet spot when to put that first spray application on, because we often get lengthy wetting periods. It's hard to, if you got 500 acres of grapes, it's pretty hard to get out there and get it all covered before a lengthy wetting period occurs. And a lot of guys will just simply wait until they get around that 3 to 5 inch shoot growth stage. Unfortunately, you blow through that so quickly, especially if the weather warms up. We can put on an inch or two of growth per day under warm conditions. And we can move out to that very vulnerable inflorescence stage very quickly.
But there's heaven's sakes that happens and we get this infection period and we're out about 2 inches, and those first and second internodes may have some phomopsis on them. Hopefully the inflorescence are protected. Is there a reach back that you could use to protect that from spreading? Or is it just sort of like you have a cold or an infection, so you take an antibiotic, so you just address it as it goes?
Well, to my knowledge, there aren't any fungicides they're all protectants, the ones that we have available to us. There are a lot of the old standards, things like Cap10, Mancozeb, Xyrem. Those are the go-to materials for phomopsis. And I don't know of any really those are all, surface protectants. They have to be applied before the infection occurs in order to control it.
And even if we don't, we wait for 3 to 5 and maybe we had the infection period, is it it's not extremely detrimental to the vine? You had mentioned it didn't get to the inflorescence just yet. So it's sort of just something we have to deal with. It's not, I don't want people to get nervous that they missed an infection period and they didn't have a spray on and now they're going to lose all of their fruit.
Yeah, it's what it will do if you get, lesions along those first 2 internode sections. Of course, it does leave you with more inoculum in succeeding years. It builds up the inoculum level in the trellis, and of course, those internodes can't be pruned out without removing everything.
Right.
And so, it may not have an immediate effect on your crop in that particular year, but it could have a lasting effect down the road. It simply maintains the pathogen in the trellis and, could cause damage down the road. We try to, we do our best every year to try to control these infections, but it's, from a practical perspective, I think it's most important to focus on those inflorescences and make sure you protect those.
Are there any other diseases that we need to worry about at that time? So I guess I should back up and tell our growers, I'm sort of leading this conversation for people who are listening to this, but Bryan Head is one of the authors for the New York and Pennsylvania management guidelines for grapes. Thank you for that. We are so blessed to have you in our region and also to have you here talking to us and explaining how we got all this information. In that particular resource, which you can get at the Cornell bookstore, by the way. And if you are a member of our program, we also have ways of getting you your guidelines for that as well. There is a phenology timeline in there, which is so incredibly helpful. I believe I'm looking at it, it's chapter 5. So there's pest management schedules, and it tells you at each stage what you need to be thinking about and what you need to be sort of worried about. So at the stage that we are at 1 inch shoot growth, which some of us are there now or nearing to it, we have to worry about phomopsis, anthracnose. I can never say that easily. Powdery mildew. Is that all that we need to really be thinking about right now?
Well, I mean, those, that was a great plug for the guidelines. Everybody should have one. Everybody should have one. I have to say, Wayne Wilcox has probably composed 98% of that for the disease management section, but we've added little bits to it over the years. Right now, I think, at this point in time, phomopsis is probably the number one thing, at least for this particular region. If you've got vinifera vineyards, and you had big problems last year with things like black rot, powdery mildew, then you might want to be concerned about, jumping on control of those two diseases right out of the starting gate. Like I say, if they were big problems last year. But, under conditions where diseases have been reasonably controlled in prior years, we don't have to worry about controlling powdery mildew on things like Concord and Niagara grapes at this point. Probably not even worry about them until that immediate pre-bloom spray. In some cases, if you saw a sizable amount of powdery mildew last year, you might want to get on controlling it at that, 8 to 12 inch shoot stage. But under most conditions, if you've done a good job in prior years on these juice grapes, you generally don't need to worry too much about powdery mildew control until that immediate pre-bloom spray. For black rot, it's kind of similar. If you've had a problem last year, you may not be worried about it right now, but I would say at least by that 6 to 10 inch shoot growth stage, and especially if conditions are wet, you have inoculum in your trellis, you might want to think about controlling getting on controlling black rot before that immediate pre-bloom, before you get to that immediate pre-bloom stage.
Thank you, Bryan. I should add that if you are a member of our team and you are our program and you are in our area, lergp.com, we have a historical phenology data set out there where we have over 40 years of when we've hit bud break, when we've hit bloom. It sort of gives you an idea of when you need to start thinking about it. And I hope that you're actually recording all of your information as well, keeping it for each of your blocks so you can have better management techniques there. But on average, bloom in our region has been June 14th. That's an average over the 4 decades that we have data for. But I can tell you that in the last couple of years, they've been June 8th, June 7th, and that immediate pre-bloom then moves you up towards the end of May. Is that correct? I mean, I want people to be thinking about, we've had an early bud break this year, so that would imply that we would have an earlier bloom this year, unless the weather completely tanks and stays stagnant for a while. So if you're trying to figure out when you're going to start your management, you should really be thinking about it last week of May. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, we're seeing, in fact, we had a student here that actually looked at 70 years, an entire, generation of weather data that we had here at the lab. And she was able to get some information from other sources as well. And she mapped out the historical weather over that period of time. She was able to show that a lot of things have, advanced over that long period of time. We have the last frost date in spring is earlier, and it still bounces around, of course, from year to year, but the line, the whole line graphed on over 70 years of data shows that last frost date is earlier and earlier and earlier in the spring. And so, we're seeing bloom dates going up and up and up gradually too. We still see it bounce in some years past June 14th.
Right.
But the chances are greater every year that as we see things warming up, that it's going to be, before June 14th, basically. And interesting thing I just looked at this morning, I looked at the last date where we recorded a minimum temperature below 32 degrees, below freezing. And it's 7 out of the last 10 years, it fell within the last 10 days of April. We only had one day where we had in May, it dropped below freezing. That was on May 13th, I think, in 2020.
I would say it was just recently. I remember it. It was May 12th and 13th, I think.
Right. And so, it looks, at least now that's along the lake. Things change very quickly, I think, as you go farther inland, farther south away from the lake. But along the lake here, so if we look at that data, I'm hopeful that, what it tells me is that we have a 90% chance of, at least along the lake, of already having escaped a late frost.
Right. Here's hope.
My words here in a couple of weeks, I don't know, but we'll see.
And the way the vines progress, 2020 was a year that we had for another April 20th bud break, same as this year. And that, I'm sorry, I think it was 2021. Let me just double check. Yes, 2021. And that was the year that we had what I would call a banger crop, one of the largest crops. Everything just lined up. And some people in our region have said it was the largest crop they've ever seen in decades. Yeah. So last year was a bit of a rest year. This year, again, we have an April 20th bud break. And let's just hope that all the stars align and we have great weather, and maybe it sets us up for another great year.
So far, I think, I'm hoping we've dodged the bullets at this point, but we still have a ways to go. I mean, I remember, I think it was 2002, we had like a May 20th hard frost that just did an enormous amount of damage. Not so much along the lake here. Again, we were protected by the moderating effects of the lake, but farther inland, a lot of vineyards just got toasted, and it was widespread damage, quite a bit of damage. Interestingly, we had another phomopsis event in that year as well, similar to 2017, more recently, but we never really saw the results of that, I think, because the widespread frost damage just completely eclipsed any detrimental effects of that, potential phomopsis problem we might have had in 2002. So.
Well, I want to say thank you for joining us. I hope that you join us again throughout the growing season in the interim of a co-host while we're filling Kevin Martin's position. I really appreciate having your expertise and your willingness to share it with our growers. This is a plug for if you want to reduce disease and have healthy plants to bring those yields into fruition in the fall. Sanitation is important in reducing that inoculum during the dormant season, and following the New York and PA guidelines for grapes that Bryan is one of the co-authors on. Following that, know where you are in your growth development, and then use this as a guide as to what you should be looking for and how your management strategies and your spray program should progress. So thank you, Bryan. If there's anything else you would like to add to this podcast, besides we'll see you at some of our coffee pot meetings.
Oh, well, we're looking forward to the coffee pots. They're starting next week on May 3rd, Wednesday. I think we're going to be at AA
Vineyards next week. Exactly. And you can find that schedule on lergp.com as well. It's a great place to get donuts, coffee, hear timely viticulture, business management, and IPM strategies, and credits. If you're looking for those elusive credits, they can get them at that program, both PA and New York.
Sounds good.
All right. We'll see you next Wednesday. See you next Wednesday, May 3rd at AA Vineyards. And thank you again for joining us. Everybody have a great week.